You know, we need to be reminded from time to time how much progress we have yet to make as a society, as well as the progress that we have made. My next guest is a digital director of Good Jobs Nation. He's been on the show before. He founded the Fair Pay campaign in 2013, and he was on the show once before to talk about the campaign for paid internships. And now, as I say, he's at Good Jobs Nation. But Mikey Franklin joins us today in a personal capacity, in a private capacity, because he unfortunately became the story recently, and we're going to talk about that now. Mikey Franklin, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Of course. Now, and when I say that you became the story, please, if you would, just tell our audience briefly what happened.
Certainly. So, to preface, I'll say that my wife and I are strong supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we wanted, especially after the shock and horror of the election, to make it clear and visible in our community that we support racial justice. So I ordered a Black Lives Matter flag on the internet, and we hung it outside our condo. Now, I hadn't appreciated that condo associations can be very strict and very tough. So we received a firm letter on Thursday of last week instructing us to take the flag down, and after a bit of protest, we did. But then the following day, the flag was down. Someone, however, had previously seen it and returned to our apartment. And on Saturday morning, when we woke up, we found that someone had vandalized our car, thrown eggs and toilet paper on our car, but much more concerningly, had left us an anti-Semitic note on the windshield of our car. And that car threatened us for supporting Black Lives Matter. It specifically mentioned that we were being targeted for our support of Black Lives Matter, and it included anti-Semitic imagery of a yellow star and the word Jude, German for Jew, which was used by the Nazis.
I'm looking at the letter now, Mikey, and this is, by the way, this is in Rockville, Maryland, right? And I'm looking at the letter now, and one of the things, it's a yellow star, which most people know was what Jews were made to wear under the Nazis, and the word Jude, as you say, the German word for Jew, which was also, of course, used to identify Jews under the Nazis. There's also what looks to be a crosshairs, a gun sight, which in and of itself is an explicit threat. So basically, your safety and that of your wife was threatened. Race was brought into it. It was because of your support of Black Lives Matter. It appears to me to be a pretty direct threat and pretty clearly targeting you with Nazi imagery as Jews. Fair interpretation?
I would say, yeah, we were targeted as Jews, but we were targeted because we support Black Lives Matter.
Which has, a lot of deep and disturbing implications, because it's not the first time. Certainly we've seen with the rise of Trump and the rise of what they call the alt-right, which is basically the racist and hateful right, as it's always been under a new name, as far as I'm concerned. There's been this conflation of a hatred for, Trump has spoken in a bigoted way about Latinos and Muslims, but this conflation of hatred of all non-white, non-Christian Americans. It seems to me that's inevitably where it goes. And before we sort of get philosophical about this, one of the other striking things about your awful story, and Mikey, I want to say I think it's I'm so sorry that you and your wife had to go through this, but one of the striking things about the story was the initial response in any event of the Rockville Police Department. And bear in mind, this is a suburb of Washington, D.C., not some remote rural location, a very built-up suburb of Washington, D.C. But initially, they were reluctant to classify it as a hate crime. Is that correct?
Well, that's a good question. Certainly, I tweeted about the hate crime on Saturday, and the tweet got quite a lot of attention. And as a result, I was contacted by a journalist from BuzzFeed. And that journalist asked Rockville Police Department for a quote. And the journalist that and the police officer who gave the quote was clearly not terribly informed, didn't know anything about the case, and said that there was nothing anti-Semitic in the note. That obviously was idiotic and unacceptable. However, I will say, in the defense of Rockville Police, after that quote was published, it received a good deal of attention, was tweeted about quite extensively, was tweeted about by, among others, Chris Hayes from MSNBC. And I think as a result of the backlash, they put out a clarifying statement, and indeed the chief of police himself admitted the error the following day, and several senior officers, including a lieutenant, have called myself and my wife to make it clear that they are now investigating the crime as a hate crime.
Well,
so the initial response was abysmal, but it has since improved. But I think it is worth saying. Oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Before you go ahead, I'm very pleased to hear that, because, I mean, among other things, you know, there is that handy detective's friend Google. So if you don't know what the word Yuta means, you can look it up. And so it sounds like basically this one police sergeant may have spoken out of turn, but that they have since clearly done the right thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mikey Franklin, but it sounds like since then the Rockville Police Department has done the right thing and has also apologized to you and your wife for the confusion.
That's broadly accurate. I mean, as you say, this officer should have used Google. This officer should have, passed 7th grade social studies.
Right.
It's not encouraging or reassuring that the first officer, felt empowered to speak to the press from a position of such ignorance. That is clearly quite concerning. However, I think we do have to give the police credit, as low as I am to do that, for apologizing, admitting their mistake. I think it is worth saying, though, that, my wife and I suffered, in the scheme of things, a very unpleasant but a fairly minor hate crime. Mm-hmm. And were able to quite quickly get an improved response from police. And we are only too aware that there is a good deal of racial privilege in that.
Right.
And that if we had been the victims of an anti-black hate crime or an anti-Muslim hate crime, I wonder whether the outcry would have been so great and whether the improved police response would have been forthcoming. And so, of course, I am pleased that the police are taking this particular incident seriously. But it's not lost on me, it's not lost on my wife. I think it's probably not lost on the listeners either, that the primary victims of Trumpism and the climate of hatred that he has engendered and empowered are not white people, they're not even white Jews. It's people of color, and I think it's especially Muslims who are on the forefront of the barrage of hatred that has been unleashed.
And do you feel, well, first of all, I want to say, Mikey, that I appreciate that sentiment. I certainly agree with it. And I appreciate the generosity of spirit behind it to say that while because it must be undoubtedly a terrible experience for you and your wife, and to look beyond that and see it in the broader context is really quite admirable of you, because these things are terribly stressful, no matter who you are. But the added dimension of the privilege, the layers of privilege involved in getting such a rapid response. My personal opinion is that you're quite right, that if this had been an anti-Muslim hate crime, or for that matter, an anti-black hate crime, it would not have received the same level of attention. So I guess I would ask you, have you and your wife given any thought to ways this might be turned into any kind of teaching moment to address those deeper and broader elements of bigotry that you just alluded to?
That's a great question. I think there are two things. The first thing is that I'm pleased to say that Montgomery County Police, well, specifically Rockville City Police, have told us they will be doing additional training on recognizing and countering hate crimes. So that's a good positive. But the second thing is that my wife and I have received literally thousands of messages from friends, from family, and from complete strangers in our county, in our state, and across the country and across the world. People who have reached out to us to say that they support Black Lives Matter, that they stand with us, that they oppose hatred. And that's been deeply empowering. And then on Tuesday, it was, my wife and I were at home playing with our daughter, and my wife went to the kitchen and looked out the kitchen window and shouted at me to come quickly. And a complete stranger, we have no idea who, had come to our apartment and chalked the sidewalk outside where we live with messages of love and justice.
Oh.
And some complete stranger had taken the time to come to where we live and write Black Lives Matter, write no to anti-Semitism, write hate has no place here, write, draw hearts, write love.
Oh.
It was a truly beautiful thing to witness. And so, look, of course we were shaken up and we were scared by this incident, but we were also deeply, deeply moved and humbled and touched by the response to it. And I think there's a broader lesson there, isn't there? Which is that Trump has empowered bigots and hate mongers and racists. And he's made people who hold hateful views think that they don't have to hold them in anymore, that they can shout them at, the Muslim they see on the bus, or they can scrawl them and leave them on the windshield of their Jewish neighbors. And that's hateful. But simultaneously, I think that Trump and Trumpism are going to bring people off the sidelines. People who had, broadly progressive sensibilities but weren't politically engaged are now being engaged, are being forced off the sidelines and being forced to pick a side. And the unbelievable and beautiful response that we've received, I think is a testament to that, and is a testament to the growing grassroots movement that will ultimately defeat Trump and Trumpism.
Well, I think that's very well said, Mikey Franklin, and I do I agree. It is definitely a beautiful story, and it brings to mind something else that I just wanted to reflect on before we go, which is the fact that it seems to be a lesson generations have to learn over and over again. The writing of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, first they came for the Jews and I wasn't Jewish, they came for the communists and I wasn't communist, and so on. The notion that it seems to be alive in the land right now, and you're talking about the counter movement, which is beautiful, but it seems to be alive again, that somehow you can pick and choose your biases, that you can say things about Latinos and it won't flow over to another minority. You can say things about Muslims and it won't flow over into Jews, when in point of fact, bigotry has its own kind of momentum, and that if you permit bigotry against one group, you're opening the door for bigotry against all groups, all minorities, religious or ethnic or racial, and that somehow perhaps we can also learn that once again, the lesson that every generation seems to periodically have to learn for itself, that we really, it's a platitude, but I think it's true that we really are all in this together and all have to stand together against, that a crime against one is a crime against all. I mean, do you agree I assume you agree with that.
I do. I absolutely agree with that. And it's on, I think, those people who have the most privilege to speak up for those with the least privilege. And, we were targeted as Jews, and clearly Jews do not, are not fully welcome at the table of Christian whiteness. But comparatively speaking, my wife and I are both white. We're able-bodied and cisgendered and heterosexual and any number of things that afford us quite significant privilege in this society. And I think we do need to be cognizant of that. There's another point that I want to very briefly make before my time is up, and that is about anti-Semitism specifically. And this is a bit niche, but I think it is important, which is that the conventional conceptions of anti-Semitism that I hear in the Jewish community would have you believe that the real threat to Jews in America comes from the left, or comes from the Muslim community, or more specifically comes from people who support the liberation of Palestine and an end to the Israeli occupation. And I have received hundreds of messages on Facebook and Twitter, including many from people who themselves identify themselves as Palestinian or as Muslim, expressing their support and gratitude and solidarity with me. And actually, and simultaneously, there are people who would have you believe, and I received many dispiriting messages from Jews on this, to this point, that Black Lives Matter itself is an anti-Semitic movement, and what a slander and nonsense that is. And in reality, what this experience shows is that the real threat to the Jewish community in America does not come from the left. The left is on the front line fighting racism. The real threat to Jews in this country doesn't come from Black Lives Matter. The real threat to Jews in this country comes from people who hate the left, who hate Black Lives Matter, and who hate Jews alike. And I think we would all do well to keep our eyes on the prize.
Well, Mikey, we're going to have to hold it there, but I have to say, I knew you before you came on to talk about this, and now I don't want to embarrass you, but now I kind of love you. So I'm sorry you had to go through this. I'm so grateful to you for learning the lessons from it and sharing those lessons with us here today. So thank you for that, and thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.